They say the best revenge is massive success, but Clara Vance knew better. Real revenge is watching the person who destroyed you beg for help, completely unaware that the hand they're kissing is the same one they once slapped away. Julian Thorne thought he was the king of New York's elite, walking into the Obsidian Gala to save his crumbling empire. He thought his ex-wife was nothing more than a ghost from his poor past. He was wrong. Tonight, he wasn't just walking into a party. He was walking into a trap 5 years in the making, and by the time the champagne stops flowing, his life will never be the same. Stick around. You won't believe the twist at the end. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, heavy and ominous, printed on matte black cardstock with gold leaf lettering that felt cold to the touch. It sat on the mahogany desk of Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Dynamics, like a judge's gavel waiting to drop. The Vanguard Group cordially invites you to the Obsidian Gala. Venue, the Plaza Hotel, Grand Ballroom. Purpose, strategic investment and partnership reveal. Julian ran a manicured hand through his salt and pepper hair, leaning back in his Herman Miller leather chair. The view from the 45th floor of his Manhattan office offered a panoramic look at a city he felt was slowly slipping through his fingers. To the outside world, Julian Thorne was a visionary, a tech mogul who had revolutionized logistics software. But inside these glass walls, the air was thin. Thorne Dynamics was bleeding money. His last 3 ventures had failed, and the board of directors was circling like sharks, smelling blood in the water. "Is this confirmed?" Julian barked, not looking up at his assistant, a nervous young man named Peter. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," Peter stammered, clutching a tablet. "The Vanguard Group is real. They've been acquiring distressed assets all over Europe. Rumor is, their CEO is in New York looking for a singular flagship investment. If they back us, the stock price will triple overnight." Julian smirked, the arrogance returning to his face. "Of course they want to invest. I'm Julian Thorne. I built this city's infrastructure." He stood up, buttoning his bespoke Italian suit jacket. He needed this. He needed the Vanguard Group to inject $50 million into his company, or by next quarter he'd be insolvent. But he pushed that thought down. He was a winner. He always won. "Tell Sophia to be ready at 7, Julian ordered. "And tell her to wear the red dress, the aggressive one. We need to look like royalty tonight." As Peter scurried out, Julian looked at the reflection in the window. He saw a powerful man. He didn't see the cracks. His mind briefly drifted to 5 years ago, to a small, cramped apartment in Queens, and a woman named Clara Vance, his ex-wife. She had been sweet, supportive, and utterly safe. She had worked 2 jobs to put him through business school. She proofread his business plans while he slept, and the moment Julian hit his first $1 million, he decided she didn't fit the picture anymore. She was too quiet, too plain, too domestic. She wore thrift store cardigans while he wanted couture gowns. He remembered the day he left her. It wasn't a conversation. It was a transaction. He had handed her a check for $10,000, a pittance compared to what he had just made, and told her to get out. "You're an anchor, Clara," he had told her, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm a rocket. You'll only drag me down. Go find someone simple. Someone like you." She hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown the vase. She had just looked at him with eyes that were terrifyingly empty, taken the check, torn it into confetti, and walked out the door with a single suitcase. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. She was probably working as a librarian or a waitress somewhere in the Midwest, living the mediocre life she was destined for. Julian chuckled, shaking his head. Why was he thinking of her now? She was dust in his rearview mirror. Tonight was about the future. Tonight was about the Vanguard Group. Across town, in a penthouse suite at the Pierre Hotel that cost more per night than Julian's first house, a woman stood before a floor-to-length mirror. "The hem is perfect, madame," the tailor said, his mouth full of pins, kneeling at her feet. Clara Vance didn't look like a librarian. She looked like a weapon forged in fire. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her figure like a second skin, cascading down into a train that shimmered like the night sky. Her hair, once frizzy and pulled back in a messy bun, was now a sleek, chestnut waterfall, styling that framed a face defined by sharp contour and cold, calculating intelligence. 5 years. It had taken 5 years of sleepless nights, relentless studying, and high-risk trading. After she left Julian, she didn't go to the Midwest. She went to London. She lied her way into an internship at a failing brokerage firm, fixed their algorithm using the math skills Julian always ignored, and made them millions. Then she made herself billions. She was the Vanguard Group. But nobody knew. To the world, Vanguard was a faceless entity represented by a board of proxies. Clara preferred the shadows. It was safer there, and it made hunting easier. "Mr. Sterling is waiting in the limousine," her personal assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, said softly. "Good," Clara said, her voice smooth and low. She turned to the side, checking her silhouette. She touched the necklace at her throat, a string of diamonds that cost more than Thorn Dynamics was currently worth. "Are you nervous?" Elena asked. She was one of the few who knew the history, who knew that tonight wasn't just about business. Clara picked up her clutch. She looked at her reflection one last time. The scared girl from Queens was gone. In her place stood a titan. "Nervous?" Clara smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a shark's smile. "No, Elena, I'm not nervous. I'm hungry." "Mr. Thorne is on the guest list," Elena confirmed. "He RSVP'd within 3 minutes of receiving the invite." "He's desperate," Clara said, walking toward the private elevator. "Desperate men make mistakes, and tonight I'm going to let him make the biggest mistake of his life." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel had been transformed into a realm of obsidian and gold. Champagne towers reached toward the crystal chandeliers, and a string quartet played modern pop songs in haunting, classical arrangements. The air smelled of expensive lilies and old money. Julian Thorne swept into the room with Sophia Miller on his arm. Sophia was everything Clara wasn't: blonde, bubbly, and obsessed with status. She wore the red dress, cut low enough to scandalize, but high enough to intrigue. "Julian, look," Sophia whispered, clutching his bicep. "That's Marcus Sterling over there, the face of Vanguard." Julian's eyes darted across the room. Marcus Sterling was a tall, imposing British man in a tuxedo, surrounded by a flock of sycophants trying to get a word in. Sterling was the gatekeeper. If Julian could charm Sterling, he could save his company. "Relax, Sophia," Julian said, smoothing his lapel. "Let him breathe. We don't chase. We attract." They grabbed 2 flutes of champagne and began to circulate. Julian was in his element. He shook hands with senators and tech rivals, laughing loudly, projecting an aura of absolute success. But beneath the surface, he was sweating. He checked his phone surreptitiously. Another email from his CFO. "Payroll is due on Friday. We are short." He shoved the phone back into his pocket. He had to close this deal tonight. "Julian." The voice was familiar, but the tone was wrong. It was too refined, too cultured. Julian turned around, expecting a client. He froze. Standing near a pillar, sipping sparkling water with a slice of lime, was a woman. The profile was undeniable. The nose, the curve of the jaw. But everything else was wrong. The posture was regal. The dress was couture. He recognized the designer. It was a custom piece from Milan. Clara? The name fell out of his mouth like a clumsy stone. The woman turned slowly. Her eyes, a piercing hazel, locked onto his. There was no fear in them, no recognition of his superiority. Just a calm, chilling amusement. "Hello, Julian," Clara said. Her voice was like velvet wrapped around a dagger. Sophia stiffened beside him, her eyes narrowing. "Who is this, darling?" Julian blinked, his brain trying to reconcile the drab housewife he had discarded with the vision standing before him. She looked expensive, incredibly expensive, but his ego wouldn't let him accept that she had succeeded without him. She must be a mistress, he thought. She must have found some rich old man to latch onto. That's the only explanation. The thought restored his confidence. He stepped forward, a smirk playing on his lips. "This is my ex-wife," Julian said to Sophia, his tone dripping with condescension. He looked Clara up and down, making a show of inspecting her. "Clara, I'm surprised. I didn't know the catering staff was allowed to mingle with the guests." Sophia giggled, a cruel, high-pitched sound. "Oh, stop it, Julian. Maybe she's the coat check girl?" Clara didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She took a slow sip of her water. "And I see you're still wearing the same insecurity you had 5 years ago, Julian. Though I admit, the suit is better tailored." Julian's jaw tightened. "Careful, Clara. You're out of your depth here. This is a gathering for the elite, captains of industry. Not whatever you are now." He gestured vaguely at her. "Who brought you? Or did you sneak in to ask for alimony? Because the statute of limitations on your pity money ran out years ago." "I don't need your money, Julian," Clara said softly. "Then what are you doing here?" He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Look around you. These people move economies. You used to cry when you couldn't balance a checkbook. Go home, Clara, before you embarrass yourself." "I'm here for business," she said simply. Julian laughed. It was a loud, barking laugh that drew the attention of nearby guests. "Business? What are you selling?" "Tupperware. Homemade candles." Sophia chimed in, placing a possessive hand on Julian's chest. "Honey, don't be mean. Maybe she's here to find a husband. I hear the janitor is single." Clara's gaze shifted to Sophia. She didn't look angry. She looked pitiful. "You must be Sophia." Julian always did like things that were shiny and hollow. It makes him feel deep by comparison. Sophia gasped, her face flushing red. "How dare you! Listen to me!" Julian hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I don't know who let you in, or which old man you're sleeping with to get a wristband, but stay away from me. I'm here to meet with the Vanguard Group. I'm about to close the biggest deal of the decade. I don't need my dusty past clinging to my suit." Clara raised an eyebrow. A small, enigmatic smile touched her lips. "The Vanguard Group? You really think they're interested in Thorn Dynamics? I read their quarterly report. They invest in innovation, Julian, not stagnation." "You don't know anything about high finance," Julian snapped, his composure cracking. "Get out of my sight." "As you wish," Clara said. She set her glass down on a passing waiter's tray. "Enjoy the party, Julian. I have a feeling it's going to be a night you'll remember forever." She turned and walked away, the train of her dress gliding over the floor like liquid shadow. Julian watched her go, a strange knot forming in his stomach. She walked with the confidence of someone who owned the building. "What a witch," Sophia muttered, adjusting her dress. "She's clearly jealous. Did you see her dress? Probably a knockoff." Yeah, Julian said, loosening his tie slightly. Jealous. That's all it is. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just missed something vital. He shook it off. He spotted Marcus Sterling moving toward the VIP section. Come on, Julian said, grabbing Sophia's hand a little too hard. It's showtime. He marched toward Marcus Sterling, ready to charm the man who held his fate in his hands. He had no idea that the man he was about to impress was merely a puppet, and the puppeteer had just walked away from him with a smile on her face. Julian Thorne approached the VIP cordon with the determination of a general marching into enemy territory. The velvet rope was guarded by security personnel, who looked like they were carved from granite. Inside the exclusive circle, Marcus Sterling was holding court, a glass of aged scotch in his hand, laughing at a joke made by Senator Tom Holloway. "Mr. Thorne," the security guard said, blocking Julian's path with a massive arm. "Name?" "Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Dynamics," Julian said, his voice tight. "Mr. Sterling is expecting me." The guard checked a digital tablet. He frowned, scrolling slowly. The seconds stretched out, agonizingly long. Sophia shifted uncomfortably beside Julian, sensing the eyes of onlookers. "I don't see a scheduled meeting, sir," the guard said impassively. "Check again," Julian snapped, loud enough for heads to turn. "I am a priority guest." Inside the circle, Marcus Sterling paused mid-laugh. He turned, his eyes locking onto the commotion. He said something to the senator, excused himself, and walked over to the rope. "Is there a problem?" Sterling asked. His British accent was clipped, polished, and utterly unreadable. "Mr. Sterling," Julian said, instantly switching to his charm offensive. He flashed his trademark smile, though beads of sweat were collecting at his hairline. "Julian Thorne. We exchanged emails regarding the logistics merger. I believe my assistant sent over the prospectus." Sterling looked at him, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps amusement, crossing his face. "Ah, Mr. Thorne. Yes, the man who claims he can automate the entire eastern seaboard's shipping routes within 18 months. It's not a claim, Marcus. May I call you Marcus? It's a guarantee," Julian said, leaning in. "But I need a partner with vision. Someone who isn't afraid of disrupting the status quo." Sterling studied him for a moment. "The Vanguard Group is certainly interested in disruption. Let him in." The guard stepped aside. Julian pulled Sophia through, feeling a rush of triumph. He was in. He was halfway there. "This is my partner, Sophia," Julian said. Sterling nodded at her briefly, dismissing her presence entirely, which made Sophia pout. "Mr. Thorne, I'll be frank. Your company's financials are turbulent. Our analysts suggest you're hemorrhaging cash on the R&D side." Julian laughed, a practiced sound of dismissal. "R&D is expensive, Marcus. That's the price of innovation. But the Project Ether prototype is ready to launch. Once it does, we capture 40% of the market. We're talking billions. I just need the bridge capital to get to the launch date." "Project Ether," Sterling repeated, rolling the name around like wine. "A lovely name, but does it work?" "Flawlessly," Julian lied. The prototype had failed its stress test 3 days ago. The software was buggy, and the hardware was overheating. But Julian knew that if he got the money, he could hire the engineers to fix it. He just needed the check. "I see," Sterling said. "Well, Mr. Thorne, you're in luck. The chairman is looking for a high-risk, high-reward venture to cap off the fiscal year. But I must warn you, the chairman is not easily impressed." "I've handled tough boards before," Julian scoffed. "Who is he? Some old oil tycoon? A tech dinosaur from Silicon Valley?" Sterling smiled, a thin, sharp expression. "The chairman values privacy above all else. They prefer to observe from the shadows before making a move. But rest assured, If you are chosen, you will meet them tonight." "I'm ready," Julian said, puffing out his chest. "Good," Sterling said. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than Julian's car. "There is a private auction of ideas happening in the Obsidian Room in 1 hour. Only 5 candidates have been selected to pitch. You are number 5. "Who are the other 4? Julian asked, his competitive hackles rising. Lars Jensen from Hyperion Tech, Elena Ross from Biosynth, the Cross Brothers, and, well, you know the competition." Julian's blood ran cold. Lars Jensen was his bitterest rival. Hyperion Tech was actually profitable. This wasn't a handshake deal, it was a gladiator match. "I'll crush them," Julian muttered. "We shall see," Sterling said. "Oh, and Mr. Thorne, a word of advice. The chairman detests arrogance. They value humility and truth." Sterling walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of senators and oil barons. Julian exhaled, grabbing a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter and downing it in one gulp. "He likes you," Sophia chirped, oblivious to the tension. "Did you see how he looked at me?" "Shut up, Sophia," Julian hissed. He scanned the room, his mind racing. He needed an edge. He needed to know who this chairman was so he could tailor his pitch. His eyes wandered to the balcony overlooking the ballroom. Standing there, leaning against the marble railing, was Clara. She wasn't alone. She was speaking with Preston Calloway, the real estate mogul who owned half of Manhattan. Calloway was known for being rude, abrasive, and impossible to talk to. Yet, he was listening to Clara with rapt attention. He laughed at something she said, a genuine, hearty laugh, and patted her on the shoulder affectionately. Julian frowned. How does she know Calloway? Probably a nanny for his kids, Julian muttered to himself, trying to rationalize the impossible sight. Or maybe she's catering his private parties. But then, Calloway did something that shattered Julian's theory. He took Clara's hand, kissed it respectfully, and bowed slightly before walking away. It was a gesture of deference, not patronage. Clara turned, and from across the vast ballroom, her eyes found Julian's. She raised her glass in a silent toast. Julian felt a shiver crawl down his spine. Why is she here? Why is she everywhere? "She's trying to psych me out," Julian whispered. "She knew I'd be here. She's staging this. She probably paid Calloway to talk to her. That's it. It's all a pathetic act to make me jealous." He turned his back on her. He couldn't let his ex-wife's delusions distract him. He had a pitch to win. The Obsidian Room was a stark contrast to the gold and crystal opulence of the ballroom. It was a modern, soundproofed conference sanctuary located on the penthouse floor. The walls were lined with dark acoustic panels, and the center of the room was dominated by a massive, circular table made of black glass. Julian sat in one of the leather chairs, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the table. To his left sat Lars Jensen, a younger, fitter version of a tech bro, wearing a hoodie under his blazer. To his right were the Cross Brothers, looking like synchronized undertakers. They had been waiting for 20 minutes. "Where is this chairman?" Lars asked, spinning a pen. "I've got a flight to Tokyo at midnight. I don't have time for games." "If you leave, you forfeit," Julian said coldly. "One less rat in the race." Lars smirked. "Heard about your Q3 earnings, Julian. Or should I say, your Q3 losses. Thorne Dynamics is trading at junk bond status. Why are you even here, looking for a handout?" "I'm here because I have vision, Lars. You just have code." Before the argument could escalate, the double doors opened. Marcus Sterling entered, followed by 2 assistants carrying thick binders. The room fell silent. "Gentlemen, Ms. Ross," Sterling said, nodding to the biotech CEO. "Thank you for your patience. The chairman has reviewed your preliminary files. We are skipping the presentations." "Skipping them?" Elena Ross asked, confused. "But I prepared a deck." "The chairman does not care about your slides," Sterling interrupted. "The chairman cares about your liability. This investment is not just about money, it is about character. We are looking for a partner who can handle absolute power without crumbling." Sterling placed a single binder in front of each candidate. "Inside these folders are the dossiers we have compiled on you. Your financial history, your legal battles, your personal debts, and your secrets." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. Secrets? Did they know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans? Did they know he had falsified the safety reports for his logistics drones? "The chairman has a simple question for each of you," Sterling said. "One question. Answer truthfully, and you move to the final round. Lie, and security will escort you out." Sterling turned to Lars Jensen. "Mr. Jensen, you claim your algorithm is proprietary, but our intelligence suggests you stole the core code from a PhD student in Zurich who later committed suicide. Is this true?" The room went deathly silent. Lars went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then glared at Sterling. That was settled out of court. It's sealed." "Is it true?" Sterling pressed. "Technically, yes," Lars whispered. "But I improved it." "Thank you for your honesty," Sterling said. "You may stay." He turned to the Cross brothers. "You two are currently under investigation by the SEC for insider trading regarding the Cobalt merger. True or false?" "False!" one brother shouted. "That's slander!" Sterling sighed and tapped a button on the remote in his hand. A screen on the wall flickered to life, playing a grainy video of the brothers discussing the exact illegal trade in a restaurant. "Please leave," Sterling said. The Cross brothers were escorted out, cursing and threatening lawsuits. Now it was just Julian, Lars, and Eleanor. Sterling turned to Julian. Julian held his breath. He prepared himself for a question about his finances or the faulty drones. "Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, his voice softer, "your company was built on the initial seed capital provided by a silent investor 5 years ago, a sum of $10,000 that kept you afloat when the banks turned you away. Who was that investor?" Julian blinked. He was expecting an attack on his business, not his history. He racked his brain. $10,000? That was peanuts. That was Clara. It was the money Clara had inherited from her grandmother. She had given it to him to pay for the servers for his first startup. He had promised to pay her back with interest. He never did. He had forgotten about it entirely. But he couldn't say that. He couldn't admit he took money from his pathetic ex-wife. It didn't fit the narrative of the self-made billionaire. "It was personal savings," Julian lied, his voice steady. "I bootstrapped this company myself. I worked 3 jobs, no handouts." Sterling stared at him. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. "Are you certain, Mr. Thorne? Credit records indicate a transfer from a joint account." "My money," Julian insisted, doubling down. "It was my money in a joint account. My ex-wife, she didn't contribute a dime. She didn't understand the vision. She was a liability." Sterling's expression hardened. He closed the folder in front of him. "Interesting," Sterling said. "Very interesting." "Did I pass?" Julian asked, forcing a smile. "That depends," Sterling said, "on the chairman's interpretation of liability." "Where is the chairman?" Julian demanded, his patience fraying. "I'm tired of talking to the messenger. I want to talk to the person writing the check." "Open the door," Sterling said to the guards. The doors at the far end of the room, which had remained closed until now, slowly swung open. Julian adjusted his tie, stood up, and prepared to walk in and charm an old man. He expected a smoke-filled library. He expected leather chairs and a fireplace. Instead, the room beyond was sleek, white, and minimalist. And sitting at the single desk in the center of the room, illuminated by a halo of modern light, was a figure with their back to the door. The chair swiveled slowly. Julian's knees almost buckled. It wasn't an old man. It was Clara Vance. She was still wearing the midnight blue gown, but she had put on a pair of reading glasses, the same cheap ones she used to wear when she proofread his business plans in their tiny apartment. She held a fountain pen in her hand. "Hello, Julian," she said, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "Please come in. We have a lot to discuss regarding your self-made empire." Julian stood frozen in the doorway, his brain misfiring. "No," he whispered. "No, this is a joke. Sterling, who is this? Why is she sitting there?" Sterling stepped up beside Julian, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Mr. Thorne, I would like to introduce you to the founder and majority shareholder of the Vanguard Group, Ms. Clara Vance." She's a nobody," Julian shouted, the panic finally taking over. "She's a housewife. She's a fraud." Clara didn't shout. She simply tapped a key on her laptop. The screen behind her lit up. It displayed a live feed of the stock market, specifically the stock ticker for Thorne Dynamics. "Currently," Clara said, her voice cool and professional, "Vanguard owns 4% of your outstanding shares, but as of this morning, we purchased the debt you owe to Silicon Valley Bank, which means, Julian, I own your loans, I own your debt, and unless you can convince me otherwise in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to call those loans in." She took off her glasses and looked at him with eyes that held 5 years of receipts. "Sit down, Julian. Let's talk about who the real anchor is." The silence in the white room was heavier than the debt Julian Thorne was carrying. He stared at Clara, his mind frantically trying to rearrange the pieces of reality into a picture where he was still the winner. "You," Julian breathed, a nervous laugh bubbling up in his throat. "You own Vanguard. That's impossible. You're you." "I am," Clara agreed, leaning back in her ergonomic chair. "And you are you, which is precisely the problem, Julian. Please, sit. My neck hurts looking up at you, and frankly, you look like you're about to faint." Julian collapsed into the chair opposite her. It was lower than hers, a psychological trick he used in his own office, now used against him. He loosened his tie, the silk feeling like a noose. "How?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "You left with nothing. 10 grand. That's it. How do you go from a queen's apartment to this?" He gestured around the room, at the sleek monitors and the view of the Manhattan skyline. "I invested," Clara said simply. "Not in stocks, initially. In leverage. You see, Julian, when I lived with you, I spent every night fixing your sloppy coding. I spent every weekend analyzing market trends while you were out networking at bars. I knew the logistics sector better than you did. I knew the bottlenecks. So I bet against the companies I knew would fail, including eventually yours." "You bet against me?" Julian's eyes widened. "You shorted my company?" "I hedged my risk," Clara corrected. "I knew Thorne Dynamics was a house of cards built on your charisma and cheap debt. I knew that eventually the interest rates would rise and your lack of a working product would catch up to you. I just waited." She spun a pen between her fingers. A Mont Blanc he recognized. It was the one he had bought for himself to celebrate his first $1,000,000. He had lost it years ago. "You stole my pen," he whispered, grasping at straws. "I took what I paid for," Clara said sharply. "Just like I'm about to take your company." Julian slammed his hand on the glass desk. "You can't. I am Thorn Dynamics. The board won't allow a hostile takeover from an ex-wife with a vendetta." "The board cares about money, Julian," Clara said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "And right now, you are poison. Let's look at the numbers, shall we?" She tapped her keyboard. The large screen on the wall shifted from the stock ticker to a series of internal documents. Julian gasped. They were confidential emails. His emails. "Item 1, Clara read aloud. "Email to Peter, dated August 14th. Falsify the drone battery life reports. If the investors know they only fly for 20 minutes, we're dead. Make it say 4 hours. "That's fraud, Julian." That was a hypothetical exercise," Julian stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "Item 2, Clara continued, ignoring him. "Transfer of funds from the R&D budget to a private account listed under S. Miller Consulting. That's Sophia, isn't it? You're draining company capital to pay for your girlfriend's wardrobe, while your engineers haven't had a raise in 2 years. Julian went pale. "How do you have these?" "Vanguard does its due diligence," Clara said. "We don't buy companies. We buy the truth. And the truth is, you are a fraud, Julian. You didn't build this city's infrastructure. You built a Ponzi scheme with drones." Julian slumped in his chair. The fight was draining out of him. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, for the first time in 5 years. She wasn't the mousy woman in the cardigan anymore. She was a titan. And God help him, she was beautiful. His survival instinct kicked in. If he couldn't bully her, he would charm her. It had worked when they were 20. It had to work now. He softened his expression. He leaned forward, making his eyes look wet and vulnerable. "Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Okay. You win. You beat me. I underestimated you. I always knew you were smart. But this is brilliant." He reached across the desk, trying to take her hand. She didn't move hers, but she didn't pull away either. "Look at us," Julian said, a smile touching his lips. "We were always a good team, weren't we? You with the brains, me with the face. We could do it again. Forget the takeover. Come back, join the board. Hell, be the co-CEO. We can run this city together, just like we promised when we were kids." Clara stared at his hand, then up at his face. "You think this is a romance novel, Julian?" "I think we still have a connection," Julian pressed, his confidence returning. "I see the way you look at me. You didn't bring me here to destroy me. You brought me here because you miss me. You want me back." Clara laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a genuinely amused, bell-like sound that echoed off the cold walls. "Julian," she said, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye, "I brought you here because I wanted to see if you had changed, even a fraction. I wanted to see if 5 years of failure had taught you humility. But here you are, trying to manipulate me with the same cheap charm you used to get me to do your homework." She stood up, her height seemingly doubling in the small room. "I don't want you back. I don't want your company because I believe in you. I want it because the tech that I wrote the initial code for, is valuable, and you are in the way of it flourishing." "You can't fire me," Julian snarled, the charm evaporating instantly. "I am the face of the brand." "The brand is toxic," Clara shot back. "Here is the deal, Julian. This is the only lifeline you get." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Vanguard acquires a 51% stake in Thorn Dynamics. You step down as CEO effectively immediately. You retain a seat on the board, a non-voting seat, and a ceremonial title. You get a severance package of $5 million. You walk away, keep your penthouse, and keep your dignity." Julian stared at the paper. 5 million. It was enough to live on, but it was a pittance compared to what he thought he was worth. And the shame? Stepping down? Giving his company to her? And if I refuse? Julian asked through gritted teeth. Then I call in the debt, Clara said coldly. I release the emails regarding the battery fraud to the SEC. You go to prison, Julian. And Sophia? She goes to prison too as an accomplice to embezzlement. The mention of prison made Julian's stomach turn, but the mention of Sophia sparked a different thought. Sophia was downstairs. Sophia knew people. Sophia's father was a senator. Maybe he had leverage he didn't know about. I need time to think, Julian said. You have 30 minutes, Clara said. The gala ends at midnight. If the contract isn't signed by then, the SEC gets the file at 12:01. Julian stood up, his legs shaking. He grabbed the contract. You'll regret this, Clara. You think you're a shark? You're just a bitter ex-wife with a calculator. And you, Clara said, sitting back down and putting her glasses back on, are dismissed. Julian stumbled out of the obsidian room, clutching the contract like a shield. He bypassed the elevators and ducked into a service stairwell, needing a moment to breathe where the cameras and the eyes of the elite couldn't see him. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He dialed his chief engineer, Davy. Davy! Julian hissed when the line connected. Project Ether. Is it working? Sir, it's midnight in Mumbai, Davy groggily replied. We talked about this. The heat shielding is still failing. If you run it for more than 10 minutes, the drones will melt. I don't need 10 minutes, Julian shouted, his voice echoing in the concrete stairwell. I need a simulation. Can you patch a pre-recorded flight path into the live feed? Make it look like it's happening real time. That's risky, Mr. Thorne. If anyone checks the metadata, just do it, Julian screamed. I need a miracle, Davy. I'm going to do a live demo tonight. If it works, the stock jumps, and I can pay off the debt without Vanguard. I can tell Clara to go to hell. I'll try, sir. Give me 20 minutes. Julian hung up. He leaned his head against the cold concrete wall. A fake demo. It was the same trick he pulled in 2018. It had worked then. It had to work now. If he could prove the tech was viable, other investors, Clara's rivals, would jump in. He could start a bidding war. He could escape her trap. He composed himself, fixed his tie, and walked back out into the hallway. He needed to find Sophia. He needed a witness. He found her near the bar in the main ballroom, laughing with Lars Jensen. Julian stopped. Sophia, his girlfriend, was whispering something into the ear of his biggest competitor, Lars Jensen, from Hyperion Tech. Lars was smiling, a predatory, satisfied smile. Julian stormed over, grabbing Sophia by the arm. Ouch! Julian, you're hurting me! Sophia yelped, spilling her drink. What are you doing talking to him? Julian demanded, glaring at Lars. Lars chuckled, sipping his martini. Just networking, Julian. Sophia was telling me all about your cash flow problems. Did you really leverage the company assets to pay for her trip to Cabo? Ballsy move. Julian looked at Sophia. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed. He asked Julian, and he offered me a job, a brand ambassador position for Hyperion. It pays double what you give me. You're leaving me. Julian stared at her, the betrayal hitting him harder than Clara's financial assault. Now? Tonight? Well, look at you, Sophia sneered, pulling her arm free. You're sweaty, you're panicked, and rumor is you just got kicked out of the VIP room. I don't date losers, Julian. I date winners. And Lars is a winner. She turned her back on him. Lars raised his glass to Julian. Business is business, Thorn. Julian stood there, the ballroom spinning around him. Everyone was watching. The whispers were starting. Thorn is finished. Thorn is losing it. The rage inside him crystallized into something cold and hard. He had lost his wife. He had lost his girlfriend. He was about to lose his company. No, he thought. Not yet. He saw Clara standing on the balcony again, looking down at him. She had seen the whole thing. She had probably orchestrated it. He marched toward the stage where the band was playing. He shoved the lead singer aside and grabbed the microphone. The feedback squealed, silencing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian shouted, his voice booming through the plaza. "Distinguished guests, the Vanguard Group." He pointed up at the balcony, spotlighting Clara. The crowd turned, murmuring. "My ex-wife, Clara Vance, everyone," Julian announced with a manic grin. "The secret face of Vanguard. She thinks Thorn Dynamics is a bad investment. She thinks our tech doesn't work. She tried to buy me out for pennies on the dollar tonight." Clara stood motionless on the balcony, her face unreadable. Marcus Sterling stepped up beside her, whispering something, but she shook her head. "But I'm not selling!" Julian roared, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. "Because tonight, I'm going to prove her wrong. I'm going to prove to all of you that Project Ether is not just a dream. It is the future." He turned to the tech crew at the side of the stage. "Link my phone to the main screen. Now!" The confused AV guys scrambled. Within seconds, the massive projection screen behind the stage lit up with the Thorn Dynamics logo. "Clara!" Julian yelled, looking up at her. "You want a test? Here it is. A live run of our autonomous delivery fleet, navigating the storm systems in the Atlantic. Right now." He saw Davi's text message pop up on his phone. "Simulation ready. Don't let them see the timestamp." Julian sweated. He clicked the link. The screen filled with complex telemetry data and a live video feed of a drone cutting through heavy rain clouds. The crowd gasped. It looked impressive. The drone was stabilizing, adjusting to wind shear, performing maneuvers that should be impossible. "Look at that!" Julian shouted. "Stable flight in Category 1 hurricane winds. Who wants to invest in that? Who wants to bid against Vanguard?" Murmurs of excitement rippled through the room. Lars Jensen looked concerned. Senator Holloway was nodding. Julian felt the triumph surging. He looked up at Clara, expecting to see fear. Instead, Clara was smiling. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a microphone of her own. "That's a very impressive video, Julian." Clara's voice echoed through the speakers, overriding his. "Truly, the graphics engine is top tier." "It's live," Julian lied, his voice cracking. "Is it?" Clara asked. "Because according to the National Weather Service, the Atlantic is currently calm. There is no storm, Julian. Clear skies from here to London." The crowd froze. Julian froze. Clara gestured to the screen behind him. "And if you look closely at the bottom left corner, isn't that a timestamp from 2023? Julian spun around. The AV team, perhaps sensing the shift in power, or perhaps paid off by Sterling, adjusted the aspect ratio. There, hidden in the crop, was the date, Oct 14th, 2023. The room erupted, not in applause but in laughter. "It's a simulation," Clara said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Just like your lifestyle, just like your promises." Julian stared at the screen. The fake drone flew on, oblivious to the destruction of its creator. "Davy," Julian whispered, realizing his engineer had betrayed him too. Or maybe Davy was just incompetent. It didn't matter. Clara walked to the railing of the balcony. She looked like a queen addressing a peasant. "Julian Thorn," she announced. You just attempted to defraud investors in a public forum. That is a felony, and since I hold your debt, I am invoking the default clause. Effective immediately, Thorn Dynamics is under the receivership of the Vanguard Group. She looked at the security guards, the same ones who had blocked Julian earlier. Please escort Mr. Thorn off the premises. He is trespassing at my party. Julian dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. 2 massive guards grabbed him by the arms. He didn't fight. He looked at Sophia, who was laughing with Lars. He looked at the crowd, who were filming him with their phones. And finally he looked at Clara. She didn't look triumphant anymore. She just looked done. She turned her back on him and walked back into the shadows of the obsidian room. "Wait!" Julian screamed as they dragged him out. "Clara! Wait! I'm sorry! Clara!" But the music started playing again, an upbeat pop song that drowned out his pleas. The party continued. The champagne flowed, and Julian Thorn was dragged out the back door into the cold New York night. 6 months later, the snow fell softly on the streets of Queens, covering the grime of the city in a temporary blanket of white. Julian Thorn sat in a small, cramped diner on 34th Avenue, staring at a cup of lukewarm black coffee. He wore a heavy parka that he had bought second-hand. His bespoke Italian suits had been sold months ago to pay for legal fees and rent on a studio apartment that was half the size of his old walk-in closet. He wasn't the CEO of Thorn Dynamics anymore. He wasn't a visionary. He was an entry-level logistics coordinator for a mid-sized trucking company in Jersey. He spent his days optimizing routes on a spreadsheet, the exact kind of grunt work he used to mock his employees for doing. And the irony? He was good at it. For the first time in years, he was actually working. The bell above the diner door jingled. A gust of cold wind blew in, followed by a man in a sharp grey suit. Julian stiffened. He recognized the man immediately. It was Peter, his former assistant. Peter looked different. He stood taller. He looked well-rested. He spotted Julian in the corner booth and hesitated, then walked over. "Mr. Thorn," Peter said, holding a take-out cup. "Just Julian." "Peter," Julian said, offering a tired smile. "I don't have a title anymore. Sit down." Peter sat. There was an awkward silence, the kind that hangs between 2 people who have seen each other at their best and their worst. "How are you holding up?" Peter asked. "I'm surviving," Julian said. "Paying the bills, learning how to use a laundromat again. It's humbling." He took a sip of coffee. "And you? How is the company?" "It's different," Peter said, his eyes lighting up. "Better." "Ms. Vance." "Clara." She turned it around. She scrapped the drone project, said it was too early for the tech. She pivoted back to software optimization for maritime shipping. "We're profitable, Julian. For the first time in 4 years, the company is actually in the black." Julian felt a pang of jealousy, but it was dull, like an old bruise. She was always the smart one. I just had the loud voice. Peter reached into his briefcase. "Actually, Julian, I'm glad I ran into you. I was going to mail this, but—" He slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky table. It bore the seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. Is this the indictment? Are they coming for me?" He had spent the last 6 months waiting for the other shoe to drop. Clara had exposed the fake demo, but the investigation into the battery fraud was still pending. He expected prison. He had prepared himself for it. "Open it," Peter said gently. Julian tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. He pulled out the document. It was a settlement agreement. Case number 492B terminated. Status settled. Fine paid. $4,500,000. Julian stared at the numbers. $4.5 million. I don't understand, Julian whispered, looking up at Peter. I didn't pay this. I don't have this kind of money. Who paid the fine? Peter looked out the window, watching the snow fall. The Vanguard Group authorized a legacy indemnity payment. It was processed the day after the gala. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. Vanguard? Clara? She told the board that despite your errors, you founded the company, Peter explained. She said she didn't want the founder of her new acquisition rotting in a cell. She said it was bad for morale. Bad for morale, Julian repeated, a dry laugh escaping his throat. Tears pricked his eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of grace. She hadn't just defeated him. She hadn't just taken his company. She had saved his life. He had mocked her. He had called her a liability. He had humiliated her when he left her. And when she finally had the power to crush him into dust, to send him to prison for a decade, she wrote a check and set him free. She wanted you to have this too, Peter said, sliding a small, familiar object across the table. It was the Mont Blanc pen, the one Julian had accused her of stealing. She said she doesn't need it anymore, Peter said, standing up. She said she writes her own story now. Peter buttoned his coat. Good luck, Julian, really. He walked out into the snow, leaving Julian alone in the booth. Julian picked up the pen. It felt heavy in his hand, weighted with history. He looked at the settlement paper. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. He looked older, tired, but for the first time in a long time, he looked real. He paid for his coffee, leaving a generous tip for the waitress who looked a little like Clara used to, tired, hard-working, invisible to the world. He walked out of the diner and down the block to the subway station. As he waited for the train, he saw a billboard across the tracks. It was an advertisement for Vance Logistics, formerly Thorne Dynamics. The slogan read, "The future is honest." Julian smiled, a genuine, sad, grateful smile. He pulled out his phone. He still had her number saved, though he had never dared to call it. He typed a message. Thank you, for the lesson, and for the life. He stared at the send button. Then, he deleted the message. She knew. She didn't need to hear it from him. His silence was the only apology she would believe. He put the phone away, stepped onto the train, and disappeared into the crowd of commuters. Just another face in the city, starting over from scratch. But across town, in the penthouse office of the Vanguard Group, a phone buzzed on a glass desk. Clara didn't check it. She was standing by the window, looking out at the empire of lights below. She took a sip of sparkling water. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. She had climbed the mountain. She had slain the dragon, and most importantly, she had let the dragon live, proving that she was not just powerful, but good. Madame, Elena, her assistant, poked her head in. The board is ready for you. Clara turned away from the window. She straightened her blazer, no longer the midnight blue gown, but a sharp, executive suit. I'm coming, Clara said. She walked out of the office, leaving the past behind her in the cold, dark night, stepping into the bright, unwritten future. And that is the story of Julian and Clara. It's a brutal reminder that the people we underestimate today might be the ones holding our fate tomorrow. Julian thought success was about suits, champagne, and arrogance. He didn't realize that true power is quiet, patient, and resilient. Clara didn't just get revenge, she got the ultimate victory. She succeeded without losing her humanity. She saved the man who destroyed her, not because he deserved it, but because she was better than him. If you enjoyed this story of karma, betrayal, and high-stakes redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new drama story. And tell me in the comments, would you have paid Julian's fine, or would you have let him go to prison? I read every comment. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.